Good evening and welcome to tonight's event. My name is Sarah Langbridge, New South Wales Business Development Consultant for Brickworks Building Products. And whether you're joining us here in Sydney or anywhere across Australia, thank you for being with us this evening. In the spirit of reconciliation, Brickworks acknowledges the traditional owners of the lands on which we are all gathered and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. At Brickworks, we're proud to be able to provide a platform for sharing ideas and discussions surrounding architecture and design. Throughout the year, we will continue to bring you diverse events, both online as well as in person, hosted in our design studios located around the country. Tonight, it gives me great pleasure to welcome and introduce our guest speaker, Sacha Coles of Aspect Studios. I'm also pleased to be joined by architect, writer and educator, Stephen Varady. A huge thank you to you both for being here this evening. At Brickworks, we're also very passionate about supporting Australia's architects, builders and design community. So before I get underway, I would like to share with you the latest instalment in our Built with Brickworks series. Take a look at a wonderful project in Victoria, Springvale Community Hub, designed by Lyons and Rush Wright Associates. Please enjoy.
The colours in the brick paving are really about what's underneath the ground and trying to have a connection to the natural condition underground. Brick's fantastic for that, to obviously fired clay or pressed clay, and it gives us a sense in which the project's been made out of the ground on which it sits, and it's not foreign to what's underneath. You know, like concrete, it's not covered in concrete and asphalt and granite from all over the world and everything, but it's something that's come up from the earth.
Good evening. I'm Sydney-based architect Stephen Varady. If you thought that Sacha Coles and Aspect Studios were merely landscape architects, I believe you will be pleasantly enlightened tonight. Sacha Coles established Aspect Studios in 1993 and opened the Sydney studio in 1999, eventually becoming an internationally recognised and awarded firm of designers, landscape architects and urbanists, connected by a collective purpose to create projects that challenge and delight, whilst enhancing the lives of people and natural systems in an enduring way. For over 2 decades, their design process has been focused on bringing together and expressing the essential qualities of place, the landscape, its history, social rituals and cultural significance, championing creative solutions that adopt a human-centered and ecologically responsive approach to the design of built and natural environments. As Director of Design and Strategy at Aspect Studios, Sacha has become a globally renowned design leader with a record of excellence in creating public projects of transformational change. Sacha challenges a business-as-usual approach, continually aiming to delight and embody positivity in each project. His strength stems from his relationships with collaborators, including leading artists, scientists and other specialists, and his ability to work seamlessly in meaningful ways with multi-sector project partnerships. Sacha delivers innovative design within a social framework, reinforcing the role that cities can play in creating economic and creative opportunities. Through his work, Sacha promotes uplifting quality of life, encouraging social equity and elevating the human spirit through design. Sacha has won countless awards and has been recognised as one of the top 30 landscape architects operating globally. He has been the inaugural Adjunct Professor of Landscape Architecture at UTS Faculty of Design, Architecture and Building since 2014, and is on the UTS Faculty of Design, Architecture and Building Industry Advisory Board, and on the inaugural New South Wales State Design Review Panel. Sacha is a board member of Aspect Studios, a Fellow of Australian Institute Landscape Architects, a former board member of the Australian Design Centre, and former president of the New South Wales Australian Institute of Landscape Architects. Please join me in welcoming Sacha Coles as our latest Brickworks inDETAIL speaker.
Okay, so thank you to Brickworks for this opportunity. I'm going to take you through a kind of a little bit about what we do first and how we think, and then in detail 3 projects. Here we go. Hello folks, and in language, Budieri Gamaru. We are at the very interesting time in terms of country and an understanding of culture from our First Nations people. I think language is one of the first and most important ways in to understanding landscape and to understanding this landscape, Sydney, where we are, and the landscape that we're absolutely passionate about and thankful that it has been curated for millennia. We're on Gadi country. Gadigal is, some people will say, gendered, gal meaning men or people, and the Gadi being the Gadi tree, the spear, the grass tree that is famous for this part. So we acknowledge that it's a conflicted time and a conflicted place, but that we're in a very positive environment politically. We have our studio in Redfern, which is an inner city suburb of Sydney, and it's a place of continual protest and life in terms of First Nations culture. And we like that because as soon as we leave our studio, we are in this environment. This is an image of part of our studio. It's at the block. It's a celebration of contemporary culture, and we acknowledge the teachings from people like Uncle Jimmy, who's in this image here, who's local. Look, I'm not going to read all of this, but there are some words in here which I love and have been written by not just me, but my team. And the things that really stand out for me are this bit here, which is about the ethos of our office. Stephen mentioned the environmental commitment, and it is very strong, but there's a social commitment in the work that we do as well. And there's an optimism. That kind of positive mindset and the optimism comes up a lot because as designers, we face challenges all the time. And design for me is about creative problem solving. And if you're not optimistic, there's a problem in that. So this is our sweet spot, which is complexity, which is large projects, projects with a lot of stakeholders, different client groups, different collaborators. We thrive on that kind of environment. Our team is everything, and through the projects, you'll see the kind of complexity that I'm talking about, which is really a ground-up, systems-based approach that we take. So where are we? We're in these places at the moment, and speaking to some of you earlier, you can see where there's a density in Australia, but there's also new opportunities for us globally, China, the Middle East, also soon in other parts, which I can talk about maybe in my next talk, but more European locations. And how we grow is organic. It's about people wanting to work with us and wanting to do more of what we do. So what is it that we do? I'm about to show you. The projects that I've been involved in for the past, let's say 15 to 20 years have been really centered around Sydney. I'm extremely passionate about this city and its evolution into a more humane, joyous, civic place. And not just for people like me, but for children, elderly, multicultural, social cross-section. That is what drives us. These are just some of the dots on a page, but really you can see there's a kind of a line which leads you from inner west in a way down to the harbour and beyond. Some of the projects that I guess have made a name for us and a name for Sydney and even New South Wales and even internationally have been projects like the Goods Line, projects like this scale, which is a recent one supported by the New South Wales government, which is about taking streets and turning them into places. So small scale, quite creative, quirky projects, through to the mega projects, the big infrastructure projects like light rail for Sydney. The closing of George Street still blows me away that is possible into this pedestrian spine. Waterfront parks, which have brought people to the place. Urban spaces that again bring a bit of delight and joy and are collaborative projects. Places which perhaps were maligned by Sydney-siders like Darling Harbour for many years, having a role to transform that into a place that people love, new workplaces, mixed-use places. That's a real sweet spot for us. The scenic quality of Sydney, the coastal walk, a place-based approach to these kinds of things, This is the Waverley Cemetery and the Clifftop Walk, through to education environments, UTS, transforming a formerly pretty banal concrete forecourt into a really dynamic place for people and students. This one I love. It's a humble project, but it's 275 Kent Street, which is where Wynyard Walk comes out and turns into a new kind of social place. And what I love about it is that it gives people opportunities to inhabit that space in a multitude of ways, whether you're sitting at a table and chair, on a bench, lying on a piece of lawn with a backrest, at a high table. Choice, diversity, these things are things that will come up again and again in our work. Yagan Square in Perth, deep-rooted First Nations input into the design, but also working with artists, collaborators to create places like this, which you want to return to. And then more recently, complex projects in other cultural environments. In China, this one in Shanghai, the roof with Atelier Jean Nouvel, and this one which has gone sort of gangbusters globally in terms of how it appeals to people in terms of biophilia, and how can you treat an urban space in something which is quite organic and yet overtly designed. So look, that's just a bit of a kind of a fast rush of projects to give you an idea of the scale that we work at, and it is from a brick to a city. We do not discriminate in terms of scale. We care only about creative problem solving and environments. So I'm going to take you through 3 projects now, which are varied in scale and varied in complexity. And the first is Darling Square, which is a project in Sydney that we were invited by our client, which was Lend-Lease, to compete in a competition. They had selected 3 architects, Alexander's and Associates, FJMT, DCM were already away, and Woods Bagot, commercial building on the top left. But they didn't have a kind of a compelling concept for what the place was. So they went out to a competition to a range of landscape architects and architects. We went on our own right and we won it. And our pitch was to do something which was about that central place that you can see in the middle there. That number 1 is a circular building that we designed as a master plan to hold space and to contribute to the urban environment. This is a mix of residential buildings, commercial buildings, and retail at the bottom. It's in Chinatown. It's already dynamic. It's near UTS. It's near universities. We just needed to draw people in. So this pinwheel approach that you can see here and the idea of creating a centre place for this was really what we were doing. Some of the competition drawings here talk about, I suppose, the opportunity for this place to draw people in through art, through nighttime economy, through cultural cues, again picking up on the diversity of culture and food as a massive driver for foot traffic in this area. And these are just some of the images, because if you're living in this area, what is your experience day to day? What's the diurnal experience, a 24-hour cycle? People are living here, what's their backyard? They're in apartments. Where do they break out? I was talking to Stephen about this earlier, but the thing that we're obsessed about, and I'm obsessed about, is the bottom 2 floors of the city. That is what you experience as a person moving through any city. The way buildings hit the ground, this is really of interest to me, and I think hopefully we're having an impact on the collaborators and the architects that we work with. We're lucky to work with mostly brilliant architects, but there is the case where we need to really drive the solution from the ground up, from the public realm up. I really like this drawing here because it's almost an X-ray view of a ground plane, and it says that public realm and the experience of cities, they don't stop at a red line which says landscape and building. So this was our version of trying to work with our client to help them understand fine grain retail, where that occurs, what's the kind of character of each one of these lanes, boulevards, squares, and what should the retail do, in this case F&B mainly, in response to that. It's pretty simple: big spaces, big floor plates, fine grain spaces in fine grain lanes, and even the public art and the way that we express that always goes back to those principles. One of the lessons was have an informed client. In this case, we inherited what was called a place brief, and it was brilliant because the relationship with that client was all about going back to them and saying, this is what you said in the beginning, we're going to hold you to account, you hold us to account. That place brief set up a whole series of characters for what the place could be. And our pitch at the competition was, this is not Darling Harbour. This is another place. It's not a place for 1,000 people. It's a place for maybe 100, maybe 10, or maybe an individual who just wants to get away and read a book or do some work. And that's what we were pitching at. So you can see in this image here, the building which we master planned, and that circle remained and was given to Kengo Kuma as a brief. And it was a fantastic commission to bring on someone like with that pedigree who uses natural materials and could easily work into a brief which was set up and do something dynamic. So now, as many of you will know, it's a stacked program, that community building, of retail, food hall, library, childcare, restaurant, all in one round building with no front door. The public domain slips right through it. It's a seasonal place. It works incredibly well all through the year. The retail is the driver of that, and the laneways provide a very different kind of energy and buzz and scale. This is a little drawing that we did, was how do you deal with topography? How do you deal with fine-grained retail coming out into a laneway and bringing people out? This is the kind of built result. And these are some of the sort of images that we pitched to deliver on the place brief, which was about creating individual places for each of these laneways. This one here, which is Steam Mill Lane, is about much cheaper sort of F&B, $10 sandwiches, little bars, but the furniture, the art, which we were lucky enough to curate for this project as well. My colleague in our office, Louise Pearson, was the art curator with Leon Parisian for this project. So we're able to take, in this case, a jeweller who had never done work at this scale and blow up her work to become these incredible light boxes, which was brilliant. So just a couple of views of the laneway and the views down to the community building, always drawing you in. Little Hay Street, the attention to detail. As I mentioned, we're equally obsessed at the level of the cobble as we are with the entire spatial configuration. The idea of this was to create a place for this particular lane, but it was also about the former stream that came down Hay Street, Little Hay Street, into Darling Harbour to a dam. And these are all representing the fish that would have been stopped at that dam. So these fish scales tell that story, at least to us. And again, it's one of the most dynamic places into the evening for F&B. The square itself has an incredible amount of complexity in terms of the engineering of this place. It's a floodplain down the boulevard through to the convention centre, but using level changes in a creative way has made it a stage for people. And this unwrapping of the building, working collaboratively with Kuma and Associates to create a kind of a landscape frame to that square, was part of the competition scheme, and that's been delivered in a very different way, but a very successful way to our eyes. So when we bring it down in scale, it's about bringing the temperature down, the planting up, so it's a really richly planted environment, and there's opportunities for people to inhabit this. It's a public space, it needs to be robust, but in any way they like. Fall asleep under the shade of that tree. The little tables that people work at all have a description of planting, language, and there's an interpretive element to those which are just discovered. They don't scream at you, but they're there, embedded. So we're extremely happy with the way this has taken on, and the fact that, in a way, biophilia is the sort of hero of this, being next to planting in the public realm. It's pretty rare that there is a commitment to horticulture in the public domain, because it's very tough to sort of not only design, but to make thrive and design. So look, I'll leave you with this one. This is the square looking back to some of those residential buildings. Particularly this one was a masterstroke, I think, in terms of masonry from Alexandre and Associates, which bleeds straight out into the square. But for us, this is one of the more successful projects in terms of that level of complexity that we see in urban environments as a mixed-use project. Okay, so some of you are familiar in the audience with this project. This is a very recent one for Sydney, and again, in terms of collaboration, it's really probably the peak of collaboration. I think 6 architectural firms, us as landscape architects, Hero Building, which is the old AMP tower, which was designed and won in competition by 3XN Architects, which sits just to the east of the site that we're going to talk about. But you can see in this little view here of Circular Quay and City North that this is a place that is undergoing once-in-a-generation change. Workplaces, residential, infrastructure from government, wharves changing. The whole area is in a dynamic flux. What we were doing was the urban environment, so working in the public domain concept from competition on. This image here shows the kind of tower on the right in construction and a kind of illustrative drawing of several buildings. The architects, and Ben's going to help me here if I get anything wrong, but Carter Williamson, SJB, we have, come on, hit me, Sylvester Fuller down here. We have Lippman and Associates, and we have Studio Bright from Melbourne. Now, the architects were chosen, except for SJB, to be emerging architects, and it was an alternative pathway for design excellence. And as a lesson for city making, I think it's a brilliant outcome because all of them, as you'll see, sort of fit into the context in a brilliant way. They all are quite sophisticated buildings, and they don't compete. And the public realm's role is to bring those together. Bring them together across the street, across Young Street, with the AMP Tower, which has a remarkable podium which is public. It's elevated from the street. It has an artwork by Oliver Eliasson, which is the first of its type in Sydney. And it also sees Goldsborough Lane continued through, which it once did, but was taken up over time and blocked. So we're able to re-establish Goldsborough Lane. So the streets go from Phillip Street, Young Street and Loftus Street, but what I'd like to talk to you about is this place here in particular, which is Loftus Lane. You can see from this image here, which is, this is Young Street, but you can see in Loftus Lane the idea of the architecture and its relationships to the laneway, which is, again, this is a mixed-use environment. People are living above it. It's an urban village. Retail down the bottom, but obviously in one of the busiest and most foot-trafficked parts of Sydney for tourism, etc. But this is a really discovered place. Formerly a service laneway for logistics, driveways, drop-off, not a place that you would go, has been completely transformed into a place for people. The Carter Williamson building here, Hinchcliffe House, is a heritage building that's been transformed into a series of retail outlets, bars, restaurants, above ground, below ground. It's a fantastic contribution, but the things that resonate with me, and I think with Sydney-siders, and the feedback we're getting is that it's a discovered place in the city. The quality and the delight that we've been able to bring into furniture, the urban environments, the elements like the seating, cast backrests, artwork in the ground plane, all of these things show care and show commitment and investment from our client, from AMP, and they gave us the license to do that. Jonathan Jones was the artist that we worked with, a very prominent First Nations artist that has embedded work in all of the architecture in the public realm. The artwork I invite you to go and see and experience. It tells the story of a First Nations man, Arabanu. And I won't go into the detail of that, but within the public realm, we're able to work with Jonathan to embed his artwork in the paving. In every one of the buildings, there is an artwork embedded, and you can start to see those, whether it's flags on Hinchcliffe House, lighting in Studio Bright's building, cast bronze oyster shells in other buildings, and you'll see it throughout. One of the things that we tried really hard to do here and to achieve was to bring greenery into a laneway, so symbolising the transformation that this is no longer just a place where logistics occur, people take out their rubbish. This is a place that people turn up every day and go home, or leave their house to get a coffee in the morning. So the placemaking element to this was critically important. The civic nature of it, the enduring materials, the masonry, the paving, the granites, whether it's basements that have been treated. Again, this is one of Jonathan's artworks at the back end of a site that traditionally would have been perhaps forgotten, through to these intimate little details. A creative city, a delightful city. This is the kind of thing that you would see and discover on your journeys through it. You can see here, these are the fish scales that Jonathan has basically embedded in the paving, and the idea was that Arabanu scattered his food in a way to people surrounding in a very generous way, even though he was in manacles. So I won't go into the detail of that, but part of the old stone that was in the AMP building has been cut and recast into the ground plane of the new laneway. And you can start to see how the grain is working from restaurants spilling out back into the greenery of the lane. You might think of landscape architecture and urban design at a 1 to 500 or 1 to 1000 scale, but our obsession is as much about what you touch and feel and the texture of that as it is to get the connections right so that people can get into a space. So these images here just talk about that kind of detailed approach. A project that I am extremely excited and nervous and in a way anxious about is this project, the Sydney Harbour Bridge Cycleway. Another competition that we were invited to go into. We ended up getting into the final 3 and we ended up winning the project. It's a new project for the New South Wales Transport, and it comes under a deep, I suppose, commitment to country, again, like all of our work. This is Camaragal country. This is about extending a cycleway across the Harbour Bridge and landing it into North Sydney. At the moment, I'm not sure if people know, but if you're a cyclist and you come across the bridge, you have to get off your bike, walk down 55 stairs, and get back on your bike and go wherever you're going. So clearly our brief is for an 8 to 80-year-old. An 8-year-old must be able to do that. An 80-year-old must be able to do that. So that was our brief. We're working again in collaboration, like most of our projects. Collins and Turner are our design partners, fantastic Sydney architects. Yarrabingan is our cultural advisor and co-design, and Design 5 are our heritage architects. The idea was kind of radical for us. We took a reference scheme and basically threw it out. We were the only one of 3 competitors who did that. The other 2 took the reference scheme and tweaked it. And sometimes I would advocate you've got to back yourself and do that. We had a fantastic jury, government architect, eminent architects, and they got it. They got what we were doing, which was to say infrastructure needs to be aligned with infrastructure. The Sydney Harbour Bridge is the hero here. We are doing a small sibling, something different. We're not competing with the majesty of that bridge. So we came up with this linear idea that has a kink in the middle which accepts and acknowledges the train station entry and the Beaux-Arts geometry of the train station as it spills out. But other than that, it's a linear run that has got some kind of sculpture to it, but that's in the detailing. That's in the balustrading, in the movement, in the structure, in the way that you cycle down it. This country, there's a lot of stories around aquatic life, whales, fish that were fished from just on the shores down below in North Sydney. So this idea of a fine-grained kind of skeletal structure is something that we really wanted to explore and make the whole underside, the soffit of this elevated cycleway as beautiful as the experiences riding it. And hopefully that's what you can start to see in some of these competition images. We always go back to place as the generator for this. We're in Camaragal country, but this is the connection from Camaragal to Gadi country across the harbour. So how do you represent that in a piece of built infrastructure, in something which brings civic delight, but also is a cycleway? Acknowledging its development over time, there is a very strong heritage environment that this sits within, and that's super important for us as well. But when the Sydney Harbour Bridge came in and the Warringah Freeway, they completely obliterated an entire neighbourhood. So these projects are savage when they first start. So acknowledging that even though something is as it is today, it wasn't always like that, right? So the idea of this is that the cycleway, which clips onto the existing cycleway of the bridge, forms a kind of a beautiful sweep around here at a very easy gradient. We're developing this at the moment so that where it lands, it becomes a gathering and waiting place in Bradfield Park. And I have to say that this hasn't been an easy project for the local community. There's not 100% support for that. There is always challenges with big projects like this, and I go back to the light rail and George Street as an example. People will always tell you that it can't be done, it shouldn't be done, but when it is done, it forms, ideally, a great contribution. And that contribution will be around creating connectivity for cyclists and building more healthy ways to travel. We're only at the very beginning of building integrated cycleways in this city, and this will create a positive link as a part of that. The competition reference scheme did something like this. You can see the difference between our scheme, and I'll just flick through some of these, but some of the, I suppose the inspiration images for us were actually looking at the construction of the bridge, the materials, the Moruya granite, the quarries. How do we relive or reinterpret some of that? The steel work, how do you take something like these box girders, which are massive in scale, and refine them into something delicate, almost lighter than air, which is what we wanted to do. And you can start to see some of the evolution of the place down through here in our testing reference scheme. All of this was about challenging the reference scheme from a kind of a heritage and a visual impact perspective. So it will be above the Milsons Point station. It will fly through the air. And these generative images here talk to, in a way, country. And I mentioned the marine life, the whale, and these kind of skeletal images were the generator of. This was success for us. If we could get a structure which has a kind of a central beam, supporting structure that almost mimics an eel or a maritime or a whale, for example, that might be a beautiful outcome for this. As it's developing, which is literally happening today and ongoing, the balustrades, the hairpins are coming together in a beautiful assembly of elements. We still have the same jury, which is great as a process to keep us true to our competition scheme. And one of the things that I suppose I've learnt in doing projects over the last 20 years is that consistency to those principles that you started with is fundamental to success. There's a million reasons why pressures will erode those original ideas, but being strong and being true to those is critical. You can start to see some of the materials that we're interested in, casting, new technologies, using old technologies in a new way, the Moruya granite, casting the balustrades, and just the lyricism and the movement of the beautiful cycleway as it moves through with lighting at night as well. I'm just going to finish on some of these images here, but you can start to see what we're dealing with and obviously the pressures of elevating a cycleway past a train station, connected to one of our iconic pieces of infrastructure over Sydney Harbour, and the importance of what that might play. But also not taking away from the ground plane, which needs to exist and needs to operate day to day with its markets and the life of this part of North Sydney. So I might just leave you with that. I think, Stephen, I'm probably quite on time, but I'd like to thank Brickworks for the opportunity, and hopefully you've got an insight into the way we approach the work that we do. So thank you. Thank you very much. That was me and my presentation. Here we go.
Sacha, thank you very much. That was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you, Stephen.
I've got some questions to start a discussion, so let's get going. And I'm going to start with a very broad question. How has what you do evolved during your time, both in terms of what has been expected and or allowed, and in what you do and how you do it?
That is a very broad question. So, okay, how does one answer that? I think we are now in the right place and the right time for what we do. What I've seen is that landscape architects, urban designers, but principally landscape architects, were always sub-consultants when I first started, and we aligned ourselves with great architects and designers and collaborators to get work. And what's changed, I would say, in the sort of 20 years is that we're now becoming the lead consultant and bringing on great collaborators with us, which is just a reflection of clients' sophistication and understanding that you have to start at a macro scale, at a master plan scale. And what landscape architects and urbanists do is think big and then come down to scale. So I've seen that change as a very positive one, but it's definitely a dramatic change. Yeah.
Is the change partly also because the idea of urban design has become more understood, or it's now becoming more understood?
Yeah, I think 21st century urban design is around human-centered design. It's around experience. It's around the words that you'll hear a lot are place-based design. I like to talk about ground-up urbanism. That's a kind of a catchphrase in our office that we talk about because it starts to set the foundations for a landscape approach first, geology through to design and buildings. It's a place-specific approach. And if you don't understand the landscape, then you can't basically commit to authenticity and specificity and all of those things that you hear in architecture talked about, but in a global setting that we're all moving around doing things everywhere, the one definer of authenticity is place. It's understanding where you are, the climate, the geology, the plants, the environment. So I think that's been recognised. Yeah.
But I'm not sure that everybody that talks about place really understands the place and that fine grain.
Place is a shared term, I will say that in a polite way. You've got placemakers who probably come from more of a retail or even an activation perspective, which is about curation and making sure there's a calendar of fun things happening. But we don't see place in that same way. We see it as really linked to country, to landscape. And fine grain comes into it. In fact, grain comes into it. Coarse grain comes into it. It's not all about fine grain. That's fantastic. As I mentioned before in the presentation, the scale of a brick is really important to understand, but so is the impact of a big city tower and the way that hits the ground, or a master plan that deals with connectivity. You have to kind of shift as a landscape architect or an urbanist who is interested in place from scales.
Yeah, scale is an important part. And I know that you were very clear about the larger scale and the detail, and not everybody is. Your work is extremely collaborative. How have you dealt with the many personalities and egos involved? How do you manage a difficult client relationship or an imposing design collaborator?
That's a good question. Look, I relish collaboration, and it's not always easy. That's not just a simple thing to say. There's always people, like there is in it could be a family, who are complex personalities, and I've learnt to give them space and to not try and patronise anyone or not try and compete or fight. I think one of the things with relationships is treating it like design. So design, again, is creative problem solving. You have a brief and you have a problem and you need to solve that problem in the most interesting and ideally beautiful, creative way. Relationships are the same. You might have a collaborator who is all bluster and ego, and that's probably coming from a place of deep insecurity. So I get that, and I let it play out and don't try and compete. And there's often a grain of a good idea in every person if they're at the table. So Yeah, I actually find it super interesting. I'm into people. I'm into the social side of cities and the way we come together, and that manifests itself in collaborations.
And I think you have a very positive way of communicating, and in the end, you're going to have to work with this person no matter what. So you find a way of communicating with them that helps both of you, I think.
Yeah, I try and learn from everybody, and some of the most challenging people can be your best mentors. And so it's about not judging too early, and again, giving space to people to allow them to feel like they're not being threatened or they're belonging in a design conversation. You don't have to agree. And in fact, most egotistical, I can't remember your words, but challenging collaborators, they actually want a little bit of a fight. They want you to stand up for your principles and what you're interested in. And I'm deeply interested in standing up for what we believe in. Otherwise,
and put forward an argument as to why you feel you're right.
Yeah, a cogent, well backed up, experienced argument, not just a feel. Yeah.
So conversely, can you describe what makes for the best client interaction or design collaboration?
Oh, okay. We've had some absolutely brilliant collaborations. Some of the projects I showed tonight were really about that. I think Key Quarter and Loftus Lanes was beautiful in the commitment from each of those architects to contribute to what we were doing.
Everyone
in a
had a
positive
shared
way.
desire for
Shared acknowledgement of what success looks like, but not trying to get in our space, like accepting that we're the experts in what we do, and that's a good outcome where there is professional respect, but we all want the same thing, and that might be blurred. There's no kind of red line about this is my bit and your bit. That for me is probably where success lies, I think. Yeah.
I think respect is a very important term in all of what we do. Yeah. And following on from that, how difficult was it for you to argue for the finer grain, for instance, with your Lend-Lease client? Was there any argument?
So with Darling Square, which Lend-Lease was our client, no, look, they were a really informed client, and I love that project because when we started, we had to do a competition, but after the competition, we were given this thing called a place book. So they had invested significant intellectual capacity, time, money into creating what the character of this place could be. And it wasn't designs, it was kind of almost like a personification of that place. This is the place where, I don't know, university students who are wearing these kind of clothes will buy this kind of thing, and that's the experience. It was kind of sensory. And so we had this book, this place book, that we could always go back, and I had a direct line to the project director, who ended up being fantastic, a guy called Neil Arklis, who I could ring up and say, Neil, your team is asking us to do these things, which is going to erode your ambition that you started with, this place book. How do you want us to work? Leave it to me, Sacha, I will call. And he would jump on that. So having a direct communication line to a decision maker, but also having an informed client who knows kind of broadly what they want is massively helpful.
Yeah, I mean, it says a lot about informed clients and the level to which some might go to have all that background information even before you started.
Yeah, we're pretty spoilt in that instance because organisations like that, a lot of our clients have architects as development managers and our clients, so we're talking to informed people. The problem with place and landscape architecture and urban design is that it doesn't necessarily straight away equate to dollars, and you have to quantify the value of a child wanting to be in an urban space, be next to plants, and they want to return there, or seeing some kind of art or some sort of curated thing that makes people say, that place is amazing and I want to take grandma to my child back there many times. So yeah, that's how I'd answer it.
Yeah, no, that's good. But what if you don't have an informed client? How much harder is that, and how do you have to deal with that?
It's a different process because they don't know what they don't know, and part of your role as a designer then shifts to educator, again without being sort of didactic or patronising or whatever as a designer.
Yeah.
So we do use the design thinking tools a lot. We use co-design, and we use, one of the great things about being a designer or an architect or a landscape architect is the ability to use imagery very successfully to tell a story and a narrative. And so if there is an uninformed client, you can help them work out what success looks like through co-design. So opening them up, what does it look like for you? What does it look like for you? And let's just have a look at that in its totality and get some themes happening. And if you do that successfully, you've got a pathway.
That's good. Do you think you now have runs on the board too that help you with that narrative?
It is unquestionably so much easier to do it now than, I guess what I had when I first started was unbridled sort of passion and drive. And that was just with no experience at all. And it was much tougher. So now that we've got projects where we've, in a way, experimented, like what works and what doesn't, and what has surprised us that wasn't even our own work that has worked really well, and we've learned from that, we can bring all of those lessons,
Yeah, that's great, What you do engages more with the broader population than many of the buildings around your projects. I know you take this extremely seriously. How effective do you feel you've been in bringing delight and a more positive appreciation of the built and natural environment to people?
Look, it's the mission of what we do. We don't have a kind of a corporate thing or statement or whatever, but it's something that we talk about a lot is when we design, we think about it like a filmic experience or a sensory experience. I think good landscape architecture, because you experience it moving and you see something and it wants to take you on, I try and get my young designers to think about it in a fully sensory environment. What does it sound like to walk on that path, that gravel crunch? Or what do you see? Where is that amazing specimen tree that's flowering in September? What does that do? You want to sit underneath that, and then what? So I think that's the approach that we take in the office, which is a purely sensory, almost filmic way that we design.
Yeah, I think the important word is experience.
It is.
You've used it many times tonight. The idea of what we do being an experience rather than just an image, rather than just an idea. Yeah. It's about the experience for people.
Yeah, one of the things that we try and do is, particularly in developments which have a transactional nature, whether you're working in the city, whether you're buying something, that can't be the reason that a project exists. It has to be about experience. Retail is really advanced in that regard. Why do Aesop shops have nothing in them except this incredible sort of interior? Everyone different, nothing else in there except the experience of walking in and smelling something amazing. So in the same way, I guess that's the way we think about design. What does it feel like to sit on this beautiful gold chair? What am I touching when I sit down, and what's the quality of light? Those things are talked about in our office as a process of the way we design, and it is about experience. Yeah.
And you talked about it with this image and with Darling Square, that you're telling your client that it's about that experience, because in their terms, the more people that want that experience, the more chance there is of them getting more people in the area and therefore making more money.
It's true. Yeah, it's a hard pitch because it's hard to quantify, because it's predictive. But I think if you do your job well, great design is attractive to people.
Would you like to elaborate on how important the social and cultural overlay is on the natural and built environment? Yeah,
as I mentioned before, I think there's a conversation now around urbanism, which is around human-centered design. And there are so many buzzwords, that go through the design language, and health, well-being. There's a range of them. And biophilia is one of them. I mentioned that today, but that's really just being in proximity to natural systems, whether it's sound or planting or light. But as humans, we have a connectedness to nature. And if we can bring that into urban environments through horticulture and greening our cities, and with the mutual benefits of cooling and just feeling better, that's an awesome thing to be involved in. Yeah.
I'm wondering also though the other layers, because you're very landscape centric in that answer, that many of us in this country are concerned or have been concerned about the lack of an understanding that our built environment has a social and a cultural layer or layers. And particularly now with First Nations people that you've alluded to or mentioned in your projects, that there's so many other layers, or there are so many other layers that are part of that experience. And we feel it when we travel to other countries that it's an important part of the built environment is that social and cultural overlay. We lack that here sometimes. I wonder about that part of it.
I think we have lacked it. Our city is a good example of that. You know, the kind of 1950s planning of freeways over your foreshore, those things are not specific to Sydney. That's a modern city phenomenon. Big buildings, commercial finance centres which suck the life out of a city beyond 6 p.m. Those things are not particular to our city, but they do exist in Sydney, and we're just talking with some of the people here tonight about the evolution of Sydney as a city of various dimensions where people are starting to live back in the city. Melbourne was incredibly successful in the late 90s, early thousands for doing that. And we're starting to get there now. It's not just a financial engine, the city. It's really a place where everyone, whether you're white middle class finance dude or you are 80-year-old grandma or a child, you should want to be passionate about it. The city should be an invitation for you to spend time in it. And that's part of our mission. You know, we're deeply concerned for people who are probably less business as usual or less catered for already.
Yep.
And so that means sometimes not designing everything out, like letting things happen over time in our projects. So leaving space for things to occur, to either be curated over time or whatever.
No, that's an important point, you know, that things need time.
Yeah. Well, landscape needs time, you know. There's an obsession with nowness and, what's it going to look like when we install it or build it, you know, those things. But cities are about grain. You know, the greatest cities are those cities that have memory and grain, and people are still operating with the cultural mores and uses that they always have. That's what we love. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're trying to bring some of that into these projects.
I think so. And if it's just as simple as the materials that you choose, you know, I mentioned to you before about the challenges with some of our collaborating designers. You know, maybe a commercial building that is fine to have aluminium mullions and glass of a certain scale up there, but when you bring that stuff down into the public realm, it kills the public realm. So making sure that buildings and architecture which is wanting to be civic or part of a city experience is well designed, is masonry, is of a weight and scale that will last the test of time, you know, has a 100-year lifespan. You know, that stuff is really important.
Following on from that then, can you give examples of how geographic location affects the social and cultural overlay, particularly if you're doing work in different parts of this country or overseas?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there is, I mean, the cultural layers to projects are critically important. If you get them wrong, you know, you've just been a victim of one of those fly in, fly out megastar designers who, really don't know place or don't know culture. So we don't tend to do that in our organisation. We have studios in different places and they're run by strong design leads. And if there are if there's assistance that I can bring or others in our design studios can bring, we'll do that, but they're driven by those places. It has to be ground up. It has to be place first. We all talk about authenticity, and that's the only way you can get authentic design is if you know the land on which you work.
Yeah, you mentioned in your talk about always go back to place.
Yeah.
And you've talked about walking the site and walking the place. I think they're very important parts of what you do and how you bring these projects together. Perhaps as a concluding question, How do you see yourself evolving and or what potential do you see in this country for us to improve our built environment along these lines?
I think having a sensitivity to big stuff, to climate,
well,
to country.
We talked earlier before the talk about politics and how things have changed just recently. So
just quietly, I think
that,
I'm feeling pretty positive about that.
Yep.
But that's not just an environmental thing. It's also a cultural thing. It's about acknowledging the hard truths of this country and that there were perfectly sustainable systems for 65,000 years operating with relationships that we're only just, as whiteys, beginning to understand and embrace. And it just blows my mind about the opportunities of if we listen and we really take that in and are prepared to give space now, there is only opportunity in the future to do better.
So we have a lot of positive to look forward to.
Absolutely, yeah. Early days. Yeah.
Thank you. Please thank our guest speaker, Sacha Coles. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sacha and Stephen, for a really entertaining discussion this evening and for making tonight possible. Brickworks is always appreciative of the time and effort that goes into preparing for events like this, and I hope everyone has enjoyed watching as much as we've enjoyed putting it together. Thank you to everyone for tuning in tonight. Please make sure you regularly check the Brickworks website for what's new and to subscribe for invitations to more upcoming events like this one. We'll see you next time. Good night.